This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus. Sometimes I write about the rest of the state. Today, we're going to talk about how to look for content and information in a nonprofit, specifically looking for their 990s. Now, when it comes to nonprofits, there's a lot that you can ask for in a public records request, but it's not really considered a public records request because nonprofits are guided by their nonprofit status. What you can access are their 990s, and the 990s are their tax filings. So I'm going to show you what I did. First of all, I went into a free site called GuideStar. Now, I like GuideStar because I can just create a quick free login, which I've done, and I've already logged into mine. And then I did a basic search, and where it says basic search, I typed in, for me, the Columbus Community Housing Development Organization. And that pulled up this page that I sit on at the moment. Now, what I want to show you is once you've found the page within GuideStar or whatever organization you decide to work with for your search, I scrolled down and I found out that who the principal officer is, which is Robert Grathry or Grathry. I don't know how you want to pronounce it. Their main address, what they do, which is public housing, and their subject area is adult education, home ownership, and public housing. Their charge, what they're supposed to do, is really a good organization, and they do a few things that are helpful in our community. But what I'm curious about is the lack of financial oversight that is conducted with this organization. And here's why I say that. When I was going through the meeting minutes for the Columbus Housing Authority, the members of the Columbus Housing Authority are the same board members that are the board members for this organization, this nonprofit. So the government entity board is also the board for the nonprofit entity. And the director for the government entity, the Columbus Housing Authority, is also the executive director for Columbus Community Housing Development Organization, which I'm going to call CHODO from now on, just because that's just easy. So I can pull up summaries, program results, financials, operations. Let's see what we find. Let's just poke around in here before we get to the forms. So we're on the summary page, I believe. This is the summary page. Here are their programs. Their expenses are $428,900, and they take in $170 in revenue. We'll pull open their financials in a minute. We've got their board of directors, which they do not record their board of directors. And then we have who their parts are. We don't know who their highest paid employee is, but we can find that on the 990s when we open them. So let's go up here. We'll go back up to the top, and they've not claimed their page, which is interesting, but we're going to look at what their IRS filing requirements are. They're required to file a Form 990 or a 990 EZ. There's their EIN number, and I'm going to go show Forms 990. Now, this will tell me which ones that I can gain access to, okay? So now they have 2021, 2022, and 2023. 2024 is not up here yet. So let's look at 2023. All right. We have the typical 990 forms. Just looks like a typical tax sheet. And we're going to come down here. We're going to look at contributions and grants. For this year, they show they got 400,000, but last year it shows they had no grants, which, wow, that's interesting. So I'm going to go back in a little bit, and I'm going to go look at the meeting minutes and that I have, and I'll show y'all later how to look at meeting minutes. But we got this year and last year. So last year they got no money for grants, and this year they got 400,000. Then there's program service revenue. They brought in 170K in revenue. Their investment income, they didn't make much. They made more the year before when they had no. Last year they're in other revenue. This year they have none, and last year they had 35,811. Interesting. And so the total revenue for this year is 570,815. That's really interesting. So then it goes grants. They had no other grants, no benefits. And then it says salaries and other compensations, employee benefits. Last year 319 and this year none. So they have no expenses other than other. Now I find this interesting because we do know that someone's getting salaries. So I'm not a tax expert, but I'm very curious about this. It says below that, it says other expenses. So they spent 480,000, and last year they were in the hole 305,000, and this year they're ahead 90,000. Wow. That really doesn't make any sense to me. Rev less expenses is a very odd number there. So they're 90,522 this year, and last year 300. They were in the hole minus $305,483. Wow. So then we go down to their assets. Their assets haven't really changed. That's their property, their total liabilities, and their net assets. So we're worth about $1,247,000. So now I'm going to go on down. There's the statement of the program services. And we're going to go on down here to the schedule. I'm going to skip the yes/no questions for now. And I'm going to come down here to, it lists the board members. So that's Greta Gardner, Greg Lewis. He's no longer on the board. He's now been replaced. I believe he's been replaced by Miss Worley Bird. Martin Andrews is still a commissioner. Kedra Gray is still a commissioner. She's also the president of the board. Glenda Richardson is now off the board, and she's been replaced by Bo Harrison. And I might have those two backwards between Miss Whirly Bird and Mr. Bo Harrison, but essentially they've been replaced. And they receive no compensation. But then we get down to Deborah Taylor, the executive director. She was the director at the beginning of that year. She's now been replaced by Mr. Robert Grathry. And as you can see, she was making $100,034. That was her salary. That's her 1099. So she was making $100,034. Okay. So now we presume that they haven't taken that away from Mr. Grathry and he's making what she made or possibly more. So let's go down here, which means that's in addition to their Columbus Housing Authority salary, which is another 100,000. Roughly, maybe even up 120. So now we come down here. They spent 6,000 on legal, 4,000 on accounting. They spent 1,300 on advertising, 11,000 office expenses. What expense did they have that was $11,000? I can't imagine. Information technology was another 2K. I'm guessing they rent their computers and whatnot. Then they list their interest. They did well. Their depreciation, their insurance. So their insurance is $97,498. Wow, that's a lot of insurance. I guess that's property and employee. Maintenance was $100,000. Utilities $54,000. Donation expense, I'm not sure what that is. Miscellaneous expenses. Their total functional expenses were $480,293. Wow, those utilities are high, especially since a lot of those buildings are not even in use. That's an interesting number. Okay, so then they talk about the monies they have. At the beginning of the year, they had 29,000. At the end of the year, they had 158, almost 100, 156, almost 157. Savings, they have 225. I don't know where their savings went. Their accounts receivable went from 38,000 up to 99,000. Notes and loans only went down about $10,000, which is interesting. Accumulated depreciation stayed roughly the same. Total assets remained basically the same. Accounts payable and accrued expenses, the beginning of the year was 94,000 and by the end of the year was 76,000. Their secured mortgages are 2,016,000. They only paid off about $50,000 of their mortgage, which that's odd. They must have a really high interest rate that they're paying down so slow. Other liabilities, so their total liabilities are 2,107,944. So then I'm going to go all the way down and it lists all their monies, their revenue. Here's where I want to look. I want to come down here and see where they get their money. So here in the bottom, it shows you that in 2018 they got 410,000 in grants. 2019, 442,000. 300,000 in 2020, 2021, they got nothing. 2022, they got 400,000. So they're sitting at a little over 1,500,000 that they've gotten in grants. Now, who are the grants from? Gifts, whatever. I don't know, but we know that 400,000 is a grant because they listed above, but we don't know the name of that grant or the obligations related to that grant or even what it's toward. So is it a general operating funds grant? Is it specific to a project, to restoration work? We just don't know. It doesn't tell us. Okay. So they say they get 97% of their funding from public support. So then I come back down here. I'm going to go a little bit further. We'll look through all of this, looking for numbers. There's nothing listed. There's no disputable amounts. There's no information until I get to the bottom. And it doesn't tell me any contributions. It just says it's restricted. So they've hidden where the money's coming from. It's restricted. They can put it restricted. There's nothing wrong with that, but they have to be willing to cough that up. So I'll be asking for that in the near future. But they've definitely restricted view of where that money came from or what it's obligated for. And as you can see, they have no other monies that came in, apparently, just that 400,000. Now, we'll talk about it later, but money keeps coming over from CHA into that in $50,000 increments, and I'm not sure where it goes or why it's there. If that's part of what's part of this grant, if it's a budget, it doesn't tell us. I'll be asking more questions. So now I look at this. It says each board member receives, reviews, and approves the return. Did they get to see where the money came from? Did they just look at the return and go, yep, looks good, rubber stamp it? Now, here's what's most important to you, because I've seen this on more than one 990 with organizations that don't like to be open with their money. Now, a really good nonprofit makes all of those grants and things available to see on the 990. But this is so you have to take an extra step. This one says, upon written request, the organization will make available the governing documents and policies and or financial statements. So I got to go and send them a letter and beg for it. And that leads us all the way down to the bottom. And this one doesn't show me the signature page. Now, isn't that interesting? We do not have the signature page with who prepared this or who to contact. Who do we contact to get? Usually it's an accounting organization, and I don't know who signed this document. So the 2023 990 forms for the Columbus Community Housing Development Organization, that is the nonprofit arm of the Columbus Housing Authority, which I'm already doing an investigative piece on, leaves me with more questions than answers yet again. So happy searching. Maybe we could go back and look at a previous one. Let's do that. Let's go look at another one. I'll just pull up the 2022 just for giggles and grins. And I'll show you it's not much different, except that they show that they didn't get any money. None. They got no money. So how were they operating? But I'm going to go all the way down. Let's go down to the bottom where it says whose signature is on it. Let's see if we can find that. Let's see, because this would have been under a different director. So I'm going to scroll on down. Here's the bottom of the form. Here's the bottom of the form. We'll get there eventually. Related organizations. I'm still looking. Nope. No signatory is shown. Anyways, same thing. It says if you want this stuff, you got to reach out and ask for it. While nonprofits have different rules of open the sunshine laws applications because they are not government entities, they still have to keep their books clean, and you can ask. But my first question is, where do they get their grants from? I think it's just money given to them by the Columbus Housing Authority, unless they're applying for specific grants. I want to know how they run all those buildings and all that property and pay their notes on that property, and they're only generating $170,000 when they're running one program that pays the director like $95,000, and that doesn't even include what they're paying the actual director, Robert Grathry, for his position as their executive director for the nonprofit, in addition to his job over the other side, because that would be a totally different budget. I don't know, Cal. I find it very curious that I don't know where the money came from and where it's going. All righty, that's all I have for now. Thank you for coming on my podcast, the Tom Bigby Tales, and this is the YouTube channel version because a podcast is hard to show you the files I'm looking at. So you'll find this up on YouTube, and I look forward to taking you on my next journey of how I do my research. Until next time.